All right, hello everyone, and we're going to do virtual selves broadcast today and see if we can help make up for the session that we missed. I'm going to start off, I'm going to get the PowerPoint lecture out here, and this, well, actually I have to share my screen first. I do that like this. All right. So, I've just called this lecture Our Messed Up Online Lives because, as you guys know, I'm more of a technology uh, optimist than pessimist, and there are a lot of things that we've talked about that I think are incredibly optimistic in terms of robotics and ways that we can help people, cyber psychology. But there are some things that are really just sort of downsides to the internet and how it affects us psychologically and some of the psychological ramifications. And so that's what we're going to focus on today in this part of the class is anxiety, addiction, cyberbullying. More specifically today with me, addiction. Some reminders for you, and that's that, and I'll make this full screen here. You have a thought paper due May 1st. That's tomorrow at the time I'm taping this. Monday, May 5th, we'll have a student-led class about this same topic. Thursday, May 8th, we'll start talking about balance. And hopefully you guys, not hopefully, I think you have developed a very nuanced view now of the internet and psychology and its effects on us as people. But we're going to talk a little bit more about things like how to take an internet break and this disconnectopia, the internet Sabbath, and Thoreau, and what it means to get disconnected from technology and reconnected with yourself and nature. And you'll have a thought paper due on May 8th, and the following readings that you see here, the Turkle chapter and then 2 other readings. For discussion, things we'll talk about in class next week, do you think that the youth Sherry Turkle speaks about in her book, more specifically Julie and Hannah, or do you think they're representative of most teenagers today? Do you think about your own experience, or do you think they were outliers? One of them in particular was a stalker. She looked at her boyfriend's page a lot, and or she found herself what gets affectionately referred to as perving other people's profiles and sort of wasting her time like that. And I wonder, do you think this is somebody who's kind of on the edge, or do you think this is more of a typical depiction of somebody in this day and age? Secondly, do you think it's possible to keep the internet away from individuals who have problems with excessive use? So if we're talking about an alcoholic, it's fairly hard to keep them away from alcohol, but it's possible. You can put them in an inpatient setting and lock all the doors. It's easier to keep somebody away from heroin, but it's still not entirely, it's not easy. And then, but with the internet, it's become so integrated into our daily lives. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm on it all the time. If I'm not doing something fun, I'm reading a book and a Kindle app. I'm logging my calories, charting my sleep. I'm communicating with people in the States. Do you think it's possible to even keep the internet away from individuals? What do we do with folks that we think are addicted? And finally, have you or someone you know been a victim of cyberbullying? We'll talk about that a little more. Cyber addiction, what is it? I want you guys, and I'll post this link here for you in the comments section of this video. But please watch Digital Nation, and I'll give you the seconds there to watch, from 18 seconds in to about 18 minutes in to about 23 minutes, about some of the problems they've been having in Asia, more specifically South Korea and some places in China, where these cultures really embraced the internet when it first came out. And now they're finding themselves having youth that are online for hours and hours, in some cases 24 hours a day. And there have even been a couple of deaths in internet cafes that received a lot of publicity. So take a look at that, and so we can talk about it. So how do we define internet addiction? There's two different ways to think about, and the first I'm going to talk about is clinically. And our clinical Bible as Americans is the DSM-5, and I'm going to use that as an example because the ICD-10 it's not been updated yet, and it often follows the path of the DSM. But internet addiction is not in the ICD-10. There's no such diagnosis. In the DSM-5, which again is the clinician's manual, internet addiction is still not in DSM-5, even though it was revised just last year in 2013. And there's a reason for that. And researchers believe, and I'm going to just double check something here real quick. Sorry about that. Okay, researchers believe that that it's very hard to define such a disorder, and with the research in the current state that it's in. Somebody could be online feasibly 16 hours a day, have their notifications on, be, like I said, describe one of us, checking our work email, your school email, Skyping with a friend, but still functioning because you're online at work. Is that kind of person the same kind of person as somebody we saw in a recent documentary about Second Life? We saw a woman in there who sold some online garments, and she made a real living in Second Life, and most of her friends were in Second Life, so she spent most of her waking hours in Second Life. But she had friends, she supported herself. Is she an addict? How do you define it? And then what about the person that's on World of Warcraft all the time and they stop going to work or they stop going to school? Many of us might agree that they have an addiction, but what's the difference between these folks? Comorbidity is a problem in definition too, and comorbidity is just means when diagnoses seem to occur together. So in medicine you have something like diabetes and obesity. They occur together a lot of the time. Some things occur together so much that it doesn't even make sense to give them two different names. It makes more sense to encapsulate everything under one name. We saw this, my human sexuality class saw this with dyspareunia and vaginismus, that we just combine them into one disorder. Why stigmatize them with two diagnoses when one does just fine? So that's the problem with internet addiction, is that it coincides or co-occurs with a lot of different kinds of problems, depression, other kinds of addictions. We're not sure, are we seeing a new thing, or is this just another manifestation of something we've already defined? Some argue that the addiction also is not to the internet, but that the internet is a conduit or pathway to other addictions that already exist, such as gaming, shopping, and then gambling. So they're perhaps people who've already addicted to something else, now they just use the internet to get to that other thing that they've already been addicted to. It's possible to be addicted to shopping. It's possible to be addicted to gambling. That actually is a DSM diagnosis. But now it's just maybe we use the internet to get to those things. So maybe it's not the internet that's the problem, but there's something else that's the problem, and the internet just sort of gets blamed. And in order to be used, diagnoses must be useful, and they must communicate something unique about the person with the diagnosis. So if you're going to refer someone to me with an internet addiction, it has to, why use a label if it doesn't communicate something about them, if it doesn't tell me some facts about them that I didn't know without meeting them and talking to them? So there are some people who've defined internet addiction for research purposes, not for clinical purposes. And they are Widianto and Griffiths in 2007. And this is a very commonly used definition for research purposes. So if I'm going to research internet addiction, I need to first define it so I can label people and then research those people. Salience is one. Salience just being another word for importance. So with salience, the person with the internet addiction has to find the internet more important than anything else. It's more important than their relationships in the actual world, more important than their job, more important maybe even to some than eating and drinking. It has to alter their mood. There have to be mood modifications that occur because of internet use. There has to be a tolerance. The person has to be online more and more to get the effect that they want. Believe it or not, some people that seem to have internet addiction have some physiological withdrawal. In the video you watched with Digital Nation, there were some youth who, when they went to a camp to recover, and they were completely disconnected from all their devices, they had agitation, they had physical symptoms of withdrawal. interpersonal conflict. So your internet use causes problems in your important relationships offline. Your parents, your spouse, your coworkers, your boss. And finally, that people try to cut down, but they still keep going back to it, despite their best efforts. According to Widianto and Griffiths, you have to meet every criteria to get a diagnosis. And then the last problem I'm going to talk about today, and we'll discuss this next week, it's going to just be it's internet sex. Now, I want to be clear, internet sex is not in and of itself a problem, but there's some manifestations of it that could be problematic for people. Some people have what's known as cybersex. That's when you text or you IM or you video conference with somebody in a sexual way designed to arouse them and perhaps to have an orgasm. Again, that is not in and of itself a problem. It's that some people do it too much. Again, is this an addiction in and of itself, or is it another manifestation of something we think about called sex addiction? Which, by the way, also doesn't have a DSM-5 classification due to not enough research. Internet affairs, about 15 years ago, were the subject of many magazines. People started coming into couples counselors' offices and saying, my husband or my wife is having an online affair. And people started breaking up because of internet affairs. And sometimes the internet affairs didn't stay online. They became real and actual. You can't really determine the prevalence of internet affairs. It's just very hard to do because it's done in such secrecy. I will tell you anecdotally, when I was in Second Life talking to people, many people were in there that were married and they were having internet affairs. I mean, it was astounding. Like approaching 80% would be my guesstimate. There was some data that came out of Sweden, so near and dear to Denmark, that suggested about 10% of adults online have had internet sex, and about 8% have had sex with somebody other than their current partner. So again, seeming to be fairly prevalent. And then there's the problem of internet pornography, which in and of itself is not necessarily a problem, depending on your views. But it's the fact that it's very hard to keep from young people if you don't want to expose them to it so early. It's much harder than it ever used to be. You used to be worried about your kids getting a hold of a Playboy or Hustler. Now they can see sort of real hardcore sex online, and it's very easy to get, and it's free. And it didn't used to be free even, but now you can go to many websites for free. The definition of pornography being the explicit portrayal of sexual subject matter for the purpose of sexual arousal. 70% of men in the States report visiting a porno site online at least once a month, so a high amount of men. And women's numbers seem to be approaching those numbers as well. So those are the problems I want to highlight about the internet that we'll talk about when we discuss next week. Thanks for tuning in, I guess, and we'll see you in class. Hi.